There were some significant events that really influenced the way that the Middle Ages began to change after a while. After the Crusades, there was an increase in trade. Travel became a little bit safer. Trade was opened between Europe and the East, and so new trade routes, new trade goods began flowing freely into Europe. And with the trade, there was also more of an open way for disease, right? The most well known during the Middle Ages was that known as the Bubonic Plague, or commonly known as the Black Death, which we know now was something that was carried with rats that was very common in trading on wagons and on ships. The rats would sneak in and they would then travel with the ships. And when it would port, it would go to all these ports and it would move from place to place. And of course, that's why the disease and the epidemic spread throughout Europe. And so this plague pretty much spread through Europe, killing about 25 million people within the European continent. And that was about a quarter of the population at that time. So it was really significant because what we had was a shortage of workers after a while. After the Black Death, there was a large shortage of workers. Over time, as improvements began within the society of the Middle Ages, part of that was the fact that there was better farming improvements that were made. Farming improved. When farming began to improve, that meant that less workers were needed out in the field. Workers didn't have to spend so much time out on the field tending to the land and to the crops. That gave them a little bit more free time, gave them more time to rest, gave them more food that provided for more people. People became a little bit healthier, and so it did help increase the population a bit. And more people began to move to town as well because you didn't need as many farmers, and more people began looking work in the town. Because the population was slowly growing, but there was still a shortage of workers, this also meant that peasants for the first time could actually start to demand pay for their work, right? They were needed, they were a commodity. So now there was something that peasants could actually start to demand pay for work, and that greatly changed the landscape of Europe. More people moved to the city, so now we saw a decline of feudalism. This system of give and take and alliances that was made between lords and knights and peasants was no longer going to function because A, we didn't have a lot of people left after the Black Death, and B, peasants now, because they were a hot commodity, were moving more to the town where they could try and get more money. So people began moving to the city, and we saw a rise of a middle class of artisans and merchants within the towns. And we also saw the development of a new type of social structure that emerged, and that was the guild system, right? And these guilds were groups of artisans, depending on what they did, whether they were blacksmiths, right, or they were potters, whatever it was, they formed a guild in which they kind of came together and created these rules that everybody who was part of that guild, who was part of that particular artistry, would then have to follow. And you're going to learn a little bit more about guilds as you continue working through your hyperdoc.